host of today's webinar, Emotional Intelligence in Leadership. So, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time and making some time for me. I really appreciate you doing that. And I'm really excited about sharing this event with you, and especially sharing part of the content that I spent the last few months developing. Now, contrarily to what you might think, based on what you know about me, I don't start my career as a leadership coach. I actually come from consulting. Specifically, I did the usual path, the business school, and then straight into consulting path, and I ended up working at an extremely high level. Specifically, I was working consulting the European Commission on policy. And that was the seed that started this whole thing. Because working in that environment, managing millions of euros in projects, coordinating 16 different countries on a single project and having that responsibility, managed to help me look behind what's usually accessible to what you see of that world. And especially, I managed to see the good side of it and the bad side of it. Basically, in terms of the good parts, I remember working with extremely high-level people with, I don't even know how high their IQ was, extremely competent, that knew their structures and their tools and their strategies inside out. And there was something to be learned from them at any second. But on the other hand, I also managed to see the flaws. Basically, the major one was pretty much the utter lack of softer skills, of communication skills, of interaction, and the lack of any attention towards that world. And being someone who was already somewhat invested in it and wanted to develop himself about it, just having done a bit of work showed me how much more I could, or how much better I could perform compared to also these high-level people. And it's not just my perspective of it. I remember hearing feedback about it of how much better I could negotiate, communicate, be on stage, solve conflict, inspire others, mediate. So that is one of the seeds that constituted my transition from the consulting world towards this attention towards leadership, communication, and the people aspect of work. Now, we're talking about emotional intelligence, specifically emotional intelligence for leaders. And maybe let's address the elephant in the room right away. Emotional intelligence is nothing new. It's something that's been around for, shall we say, 3 decades. But if you look at it, if you're honest with what you've seen, in the large majority of the world, it's always been something considered, yes, important, but something like an add-on. Something that is nice to have from your leader, but maybe something not essential. Let's face it, nobody judges you on how emotionally intelligent you are. They judge you on the numbers that you manage to get. They judge you on the results. They judge you on the number of sales. So the usual concept was always, sure, once you've reached your target, once you've got the numbers, once everything else is in place, sure, we can think about emotional intelligence, and that's fine. And that was the, let's say, the general mindset until now. Now, with this tragedy that is COVID-19, that has touched so many lives in such a hardcore way, we have managed to touch firsthand how wrong that mindset was. We've seen how much of a need for psychological safety there is, how much need for safety in general, how much we long for a connection on a personal and on a professional level. And that is something that has become extremely evident. And my hope is that once we manage to leave this year and leave this virus behind, my hope is that this mindset will persevere, will continue to exist. And I've actually come across a LinkedIn post recently that looked specifically at the role of leaders or how it's changing. And long story short, the result of a new way of working, long distance, remote, plus AI taking over a lot of menial tasks means that the only thing that bosses or leaders have to focus on or have left to focus on is the people aspect. And if you look even deeper into it, you come across very interesting material, very interesting studies that I've also used for this research and this work that I've done. And I would like to share one of them with you specifically. It's a study about trust that's been looking at companies and the level of trust and the impact of the trust in a company for about 10 years. The author is Paul J. Zak. And trust is one of the main outcomes of emotional intelligence. And when I've seen these numbers, I remember being extremely shocked. And my hope, my honest hope, is that you will be just as shocked as I was when I saw them first. Here they are. This is a comparison between a high trust company and a low trust company. In a high trust company, you can count on people having double the energy. Double. They can take over 1.5 times more work. This means that if a person was able to deal with 2 projects, if 2 people were able to deal with 2 projects, now those 2 people are able to deal with 3 projects. And you can expect a drop in the rate of sick days and a massive drop also in the rate of burnout risks. Now look at those numbers, and these are only solely connected to the level of trust in a company. Look at those numbers and tell me again that the idea of emotional intelligence not having any direct financial, tangible effects is correct. It just doesn't make any sense. So we are in a situation now where we are aware that we need to develop more emotional intelligence. We need to structure it more. But here is where some problems start. Specifically, I want to show you some signs of what I consider an issue. The first one is that because emotional intelligence has been around for so long, it's now become part of, let's call it pop culture. And as such, you have a lot of snippets of knowledge here and there, all touching a micro aspect of it, or something somewhat related to it. Think about blog posts or podcasts or mini books on feedback, on conflict resolution, or just looking at empathy or mindfulness as well. And all of those, mind you, I have full respect for all of those topics, and I think they're essential. But they all intersect with this larger bulk of content that is emotional intelligence. And an issue that you have with all these content being disseminated that way is that it doesn't go deep enough to develop something coherently and organically, and it doesn't rely sufficiently, in my opinion, on something scientific and battle and practice tested. Of course, you could go on the other hand, going straight to the source, going on to academic papers, onto all the original research that has been done on it. And I've done it, and it's quite frankly fascinating. But the amount of time it takes to do that is insane. And also the language of that material isn't always the most acceptable one or the most palatable one. I'll give you one example for all. Emotional Intelligence, the book by Goleman. I recognize that it's a brilliant book, that is groundbreaking, that it has started a revolution, that has opened up a whole different side of science. But at the same time, I need to be honest with myself. That book is terribly written. It's really badly written. Or maybe it's written for an audience who is interested in the general idea or the theoretical topic. But if your goal as a leader is to develop emotional intelligence and find a way to practically build your skills and implement them and see all those results, those wonderful numbers we've seen about trust, for example, well, that's not going to do much for you, is it? You need to read the book, understand the concept, and then find out ways to do that. So this is where I wanted to come in with my course. I'm going to share quite a bit of content from this course in the rest of this webinar, but I want to give you just a brief overview. I wanted this course to be extremely practical, extremely hands-on, but also science-based. So everything you're going to hear from me today or throughout the course, if you want it, is referenced. And I will give you every single reference for any specific concept I am measuring. Why? Because it's the only way I have to make sure that I'm not just making up stories in my head. I want to make sure that I'm giving you something that is true and that you can rely on. And referencing everything is the only way I have to do that. But that said, I've devoted the major aspect of the course onto the practical points. So, how do you do it? This is the concept. How do you develop it? And I'm giving you tools, methodologies, and templates, also all science-based, in order to help you go through the process of developing emotional intelligence step by step. And I'm actually really excited about this. Today is the day I made the course public, and because it's such a special occasion, I've decided to give you also a discount code that will grant you 15% off the listed price. I'm going to give it to you at the end of the webinar, so you might want to stick around also for that. Great, that was the introduction. We talked about who I am, what emotional intelligence is about. Let's start getting a bit more into the content. And let's just play the devil's advocate, asking the real question. What is emotional intelligence? What are we talking about exactly? Because it's something we've always heard, but what's the point? Now, the way I like to describe it the most is a higher level of control on your emotional life, or the ability to move your role with dealing with your emotional life from a passive one to an active one. Here is what I mean. Most of our emotional life is unconscious, if you want. Whenever you feel something, you kind of accept it and let it drive your behaviors. Let it drive your point of view for that day until you feel that emotion, and drive your decisions perhaps. And that is fine in our daily life, but when it comes to negative emotions specifically, mixed with leadership, well, that becomes a dangerous cocktail. Because if you've ever been in a very negative emotional state, particularly sad or remorseful about something you've done, or rageful about something, you know how easy it is to be so caught up into that emotion that it occupies almost your whole headspace. It becomes difficult to focus on anything else. It becomes difficult to judge a situation right. You may become more irritable, and you see that those are not leadership traits at all. So if instead you manage to remove that role and take an active role in the impact that that emotion has on you, and to limit it, or choose to accept it, or redirect your energy elsewhere, that is the effect. That means being emotionally intelligent. So if that is true, what are the effects? Well, the first one, I just described it. It means that being emotionally intelligent means being able to reduce the level of strain that your brain is under. You don't have something lurking in the background and bothering you at every step. Instead, you have more freedom to focus on what is relevant. You can direct your energy on something that is important for you at that moment. Like, for example, a task that you need to do, or a skill that you need to acquire, and you'll be able to learn it faster, or a difficult concept that you need to understand, or perhaps the ability to create, imagine, experiment more in your head, and choose directions and use those directions to inform your decisions. And at a larger level, it allows you to be more aware of your immediate environment, meaning that because you have more space and more focus to give, you'll be more aware of events that happen around you, and you'll be able to read the deeper meaning and inform your behaviors based on that. And when it comes to your team, you'll be able to see dynamics develop and read between the lines of what is happening. And most importantly, and this is the golden nugget when it comes to emotional intelligence, you'll be able to relate more with each one of your team members as a leader. Because you have more focus and attention to provide to them, you will be able to build a more trustworthy, a more solid, respectful, transparent rapport with them. And once you manage to lead on the basis of that rapport, well, all the immediate consequences are more trust with all the nice numbers we've seen above, resilience, commitment, higher levels of performance, all of the gold that all leaders want to strive to, and in the end you get judged on if you still have someone above you with the old mindset. So all of this is great, fantastic. So the only thing left to look at is, how do you develop it? And for me, yeah, actually not for me, based on all the research that I've done, you have always the same four different steps. There are four areas to emotional intelligence that you need to develop, and key point, you need to develop them in order. Here they are. Self-awareness, number one. Number two, recognizing your own emotions and influence your emotional state. Number three, reading others and reading their emotional state. And number four, interacting at an emotional level. Now, if you've been around this topic somehow, you know that all the focus is on point four, interacting at an emotional level. And it's fair, that's where the most tangible outcomes are. But the point is, you're going to be able to perform well in that area only if you've done the work beforehand. It's a process, and a process takes time. I always compare it to playing the piano. You don't start by improvising jazz. You start by looking at the theory, looking at the notes and the music, and then you can do anything you want with it. And here comes the first piece of content that I want to give you, straight from the course, but I've decided to give it out for free. Because all of this is nice and great, and we can talk about all this in theory for hours. But the relevant point is your specific situation, where your starting point is. And this is why I've designed a self-assessment. Basically, this self-assessment is something that will take you about, I would say, not more than 15 minutes. Oh, Cyrus, I've just seen your comment. I just turned up the volume. I hope it works better. So this self-assessment is something that you can take straight on my website, and it's something that will enable you to figure out a few things. First of all, where your starting point is when it comes to emotional intelligence. We're all starting with different levels based on our upbringing, our cultural environment, about a number of factors. And there is no right or wrong in this. But before trying to get better at something, it's always good to know your starting point. So what you'll find in the test is about 40 statements, all of them, again, based, rooted in science. I'm referencing every source at the bottom of the page. And all you need to do is point out how much you agree or disagree with anything that's being written on there. And what this will tell you in the end is, first of all, your overall, let's call it score on emotional intelligence, but also it will break down how well you perform, let's put it this way, in each one of these four areas. Now, I have some issues saying how much you score, how much you perform, because there is no right or wrong answer here. There is no judgment whatsoever. But this is only meant to help you understand or to help you map where you need to focus your attention the most, or what area you need to focus on the most. So I encourage you at the end of this webinar, go over to that page and take the test. It's going to, at the very least, give you something to think about. And by the way, if you have any comments or any questions that come out, feel free to write them down. I'll address them as soon as I see them, or if relevant, at the end of the workshop. All right? Breaking down now, we've been talking about these four areas. What I want to do with you is go through all of them and give you a general idea of what you can expect in each one and some content that you can think about. First of all, self-awareness. Self-awareness when it comes to emotional intelligence simply means being more in touch, if you pass me a holistic term, with your emotional self, with what you're feeling exactly. And if you're taken aback by this because you already know if you're feeling happy or sad, I know where you're coming from. You know if you're happy or sad, of course, but how often do you actively think about it and not just feel it in the background? And also, how much are you willing to go in detail? So of course, you're sad at a certain point of the day, fine. But can you decline it some more? Are you maybe pensive? Are you worried? Are you exacerbated? All of those are slightly different emotions, but that give you a bit more information about your emotional state. And also, if you go to a deeper level of detail, you're going to be able to trace all of them back to a specific trigger. And once you have that idea, if you know what triggered a specific emotion, and you can rebuild the chain of events to an emotion and see the effects of your behavior, well, that's an extremely deeper grasp that you have on your emotional life. Think about it in terms of, I like to compare them with cars. I love cars. I grew up watching Top Gear and stuff like this, and I love, it's just one of my passions. However, if you ever ask me to pop open the trunk of a car and try to fix an engine, I will have no idea. I will have no idea where to put my hands because I don't even recognize the pieces. What you're doing in this phase of self-awareness is recognizing where the pieces are and mapping out your emotional life. And only then can you move on to the next step. The next step being exactly influencing or recognizing precisely your own emotional state and influencing your own emotions. Now, here's the thing. We've seen how our emotional life can be passive. And if we're overcome by a negative emotion, it becomes easy to get triggered. It becomes easy to not focus right, to not relate to others well. And we've seen that that's very dangerous grounds for a leader. So in your role, it is your duty to figure out where you are emotionally at the very first possible moment, and see if you would be behaving or relating to your team in a way that is detrimental for them. And because you've done the previous step, because you've worked on your self-awareness, you're able to understand exactly what's going on and what is happening. And because of this, if you see that you need to intervene, you will be able to learn how to do it. So if you want to keep the engine metaphor, this point is not just recognizing what pieces of the engine are in front of you, but it's your ability to fiddle around with them. You need to know where to put your hands and what pieces to connect in order to make the whole car work. And for this, what you need to remember is working in two different steps. And in the course, I'm going a lot more in detail on each point and giving you specific hacks and specific methodologies to do that. So the first step is recognizing that something is wrong with you at an emotional level and it has an impact on others. And your first point is to snap out of it. Here, your best allies are your sense of humor and hacking your level of happiness. And I know these sound weird at a first glance, but in terms of happiness, of course, we all like being happy and we all behave better when we're happy. But maybe not all of us know how much control we do actually have. We usually think it's all related to our own being or specific conditions that apply around us. But it's not exactly like that. There are studies about it that have shown that 50% of your happiness levels, is, let's say genetic, has to do with you, with your values. 10% is dependent on your external conditions, but you have full control on 40% of how happy you are. And that's not a minor amount. It means that once you know how to attack that 40%, and I'm going to show you how in the course, you know how to make yourself feel happier in a coherent way and start counteracting the effect of that negative emotion that's taking you down. And when it comes to humor, humor is something very important, also very dear for me in my work. But long story short, we all have our own sense of humor. But the interesting point is that there are 4 major senses of humor, and your sense of humor and mine and everyone's is a combination of those 4. And there is a test that we'll share with you in the course that shows you exactly what the combination of those 4 senses of humor is for you. Why should you be interested in that? Because 2 of them are negative, 2 of them are positive, 2 of them can help you counteract this effect, and 2 of them can instead make things work. So if you think about working with humor, you need to know also where you are putting your hands. Because once you manage to attack that, you can have a great result or you can have a terrible result. And those are the two areas that constitute this first step. If you manage to go through hacking happiness and hacking your sense of humor correctly, you will have completed the first step of the process. And the second step then will be to make sure you're not dragged back in. And to do that, what you need to look at is focus, how can I put it? You need to find your way to activate a sense of flow, of very high concentration, high focus onto one specific topic. There are a few different ways of doing that. You may have your own. I like to rely on a few of them that I go through directly in the course. But if you find a way to enter a state of flow and focus on something, then if you've done the first step beforehand, you'll be able to have successfully influenced your own emotional state. So this is the first 2 points, the first 2 major areas. Recognizing what you're feeling and why, and then influencing your own emotional state. Knowing the strategies, the steps, the process, the hacks to start from a negative emotional state with all the negative outcomes that come with it and redirecting, reframing it to a more positive one. And only then, only at this point, you get to start interacting with others. And we will see why in a second. Because once you're done with this area, you can start looking at other people. You can start working with them. But if you want to still keep the metaphor of the engine, by the same token, if you don't know what you're dealing with other people, if you don't recognize exactly what they're going through, and you still want to fiddle with that, try to influence them, there is a very high chance that all of that will backfire. And that's the last thing you want as a leader. So the focus of this area is pretty much doing the same thing with others as you've done with yourself in the first area. Recognizing what they're feeling, reading them, try to go deeper and try to also make educated guesses about what they're going through and why. All of this are going to be sources of information that you will be able to use later on when you need to interact with them. And for me, the most immediate and the most valuable skill that you can have is body language. Your ability to read other people's body language. And in the course, I will give you a full primer on what that means. And my way of working with it is dividing it in 4 areas. Shape, intonation, rhythm, coherence. Shape is simply the shape of a person's body. There are certain aspects you need to separate a structure. You can look at someone's body shape or posture that will give you different types of information. And that for me is the richest source of information that you can use later on. Following up, intonation. Intonation is the tone of voice that they're following, their stability, their pitch. It can reveal a lot more of what a person is saying. Third, rhythm. We're talking about rhythm of breathing and rhythm of the conversation. And it's not just slow or fast. There is quite a bit more to it. And the last one, coherence, has to do with checking if the other 3 elements, shape, intonation, and rhythm, make sense and all point in the same direction or not. Because sometimes people will want to portray something that they don't really mean in order to not show too much of their true cards. And this is something you also may want to understand as a leader. Rad, I saw your question. You're asking if number 3 is related to social awareness, recognizing others. The way I read social awareness is basically understanding your position or the impacts of your behaviors in a group of people. If that is correct, if my interpretation of what you're saying is correct, somehow it gives you the information that you will use to it gives you enough information that you will be then later on be able to feed into your interactions, but it's not completely the case. Actually, if that is exactly what you meant, I'll be talking about something in the fourth area that you might find interesting in that regard. And by the way, thank you for your question. And speaking of which, going directly through the fourth area, which is interacting at an emotional level. Now, this is the area with the most tangible, the most known outcomes of emotional intelligence, inspiring others, driving others, building resilience, building trust in leadership, all of that. And it is true, but I hope you saw the whole process until now and you see how, in order to perform at your best in there, you need to go through all the other three steps. And here I want to separate two major roles or two major aspects of this section when it comes to leadership. One of them is your day-to-day interaction with others, and one of them are specific strategies and tools that you can implement when you see that you need to intervene more heavily. Now, when it comes to your day-to-day interactions, of course, you want to get to your end game as soon as possible, being the leader that other leaders look up to, that other people are inspired by, the person that has that is trusted and respected. Of course, you want to go there. And the risk there is to rush it too much. You want to come in and do something major, a big event, a workshop in order to get to the point immediately. But building a relationship with others, building your persona ethically, always be ethical about it, and building these types of skills takes time. So the best way to do it, and again, this is everything you're hearing is rooted in science, is to do just a little bit every day. So there is a concept that I rely upon for this area, which is called high quality connections. Fancy name, but all it is a series or different types of brief, quick, playful, uplifting, transparent, and short interactions that you may have with anyone else. It can be as simple as holding the elevator door open for one member of your team that you see running to get the elevator. It can be as simple as that. But the key here is not to do everything in one go, but to go for the medium term. Do a little bit every day. Disseminate them throughout your day and see where you can go with that. And to go more in detail about this, during the course, I share with you seven main triggers, seven triggers that are able to, call it seven triggers to generate high quality connections. And this is something that can help you build a mental map that can help you bring them into your own reality. And of course, you can go through those in theory, look at them and decide by yourself what you want to do. But you know that because your situation is so unique, you need to find your unique way of applying them. And each person you interact with has a different way of being. And before you find something that works appropriately with that person, you need to read who that person is, you need to understand better, etc. So this is why it all builds up, all the stuff that we discussed before, build up to this point. And when it comes to special situations, here is where things get actually somewhat interesting. Because there is one concept that you need to keep very dear in mind when it comes to emotional intelligence and leadership, which is called emotional contagion. Simply put, in a group, any group, the group always takes or leans towards the emotional state of the most emotionally charged person. So if you are all working together and the humor is, the mood is medium, it's business as usual. But someone comes in with great news. He proposed to his girlfriend, now fiancée. He won the lottery, something he's coming with this wonderful burst of joy. You will see that emotion spread out to everyone else in the room. Or by the same token, if you're out having a beer with your friends at the pub or wherever you meet your friends, and you're having a good time, and someone else comes in a foul mood, you will feel all the mood converge towards that direction. That is the phenomenon you need to be aware of. And not only be aware of it, but when you see that someone can trigger a reaction like this in the rest of the team, you need to be able to intervene. Why? Because if you don't, that lower mood will basically challenge everyone and bring in all those negative effects that the person is suffering to the rest of the team. And you will see productivity go down, the mood go down, you will see performance dwindling, less focus, etc., etc. So stuff that you don't want for your team on a health level, personal health, and also at a professional performance level. And here in the course, I'm giving you a 3-step strategy to deal precisely with this. And last, a major aspect of emotional intelligence and leadership is conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is a big topic. And the conflicts I'm dealing with right now is conflicts where you are involved in, and all of this, the material I've used for it is also a personal story. And the idea is giving you a strategy to follow, a battle-tested scientific strategy to follow, but also based on everything you've discussed so far. It's an advanced technique, and that's why it comes at the end of the course. Because if I share with you without you having done any work, well, you're going to look at it, but applying it will be a lot more different. It's something that is extremely effective, but it's something that requires some work beforehand. It requires being able to separate the symptom, the anger, the rage of whoever is in front of you from the trigger. So you always need to go down and find the trigger. It involves a specific way of phrasing back and forth and following a specific rhythm, making sure that your message lands and making sure that the person understands it in a different and in a deeper way. And then it involves having the ability of going deeper in addressing the trigger cause of it. Of course, this is the overview, it's the skeleton, but it's something that involves a lot more input and work than this. And for me, this is the final point. Once you've managed to successfully go through all these phases, these areas of emotional intelligence, then what you can reasonably expect, I would say, give or take 1 to 3 months of work, big max, not work on yourself, but work with your team, that's what I'm talking about, you will see results starting to stream in. And your team will notice. You can be explicit about the work that you're doing, and your team will notice and appreciate the type of work that you're putting into it. It's something that has to do with thankfulness, and as we would see in the course, thankfulness is a terrific weapon to have for leaders. Now, do you have any specific questions before I start wrapping it up and give you some extra content? Rad, I think number 4 resonates with relationship management, also known as social management. I think we're going in the same direction or in a similar direction there. I hope I've managed to answer the questions that you had while I was going through the 4th area. Right, so we've seen how, during this course, we've looked at what emotional intelligence is, why it is relevant for leaders, and specifically relevant for our age right now, and for the role that expects leaders later on. And we've seen how tightly connected it can be if applied well and scientifically to, we've seen how much of an impact it can have on performance, on team performance, on the results that you can achieve. And we've seen how we can break it down in 4 areas. The starting point, of course, is finding out where you are with respect to those 4 areas. And for that, I've given you the link to the free assessment tool that I've put out, and there is also some additional content that I have shared in some videos below that page. And what I had promised before, today is the launch day of this course, and I'm extremely excited about this. And because I'm so happy and I want to share something else, here is the course's homepage and the code that will give you 15% off if you're interested in purchasing it. Cyrus, how about if people don't really appreciate the changes you make? It's really a turn-off during the changing process. Indeed, that's a very good question. Thank you. Well, of course, you need to figure out who is in front of you, and it's something that has a rather senior question. I'll address it in a second. Of course, you always relate to different. The voice is very low. I cannot raise the volume anymore. I'm sorry about this. If back to the question. Yeah, Cyrus. If I'm trying to get closer to the mic. Well, if people don't really appreciate the changes you make, it's a turn-off during the changing process. Right. And for me, that has to do with not only with being a leader, but also with people that surround you. If you have the full freedom of hiring your own team, of dealing with others, and deciding who you want to be in what position, that is great. Then you wouldn't have to possibly worry about it because you would develop your own team, and it's a human connection. But also, sometimes you're just placed in to lead an existing team, and that you don't have much choice in it. There, the best thing you can do is work on reading others, work on understanding them, and double down on how much information you try to get from them. Or what you can also do is put rituals in place to have one-on-ones every week with everybody. What you want to do is learn as much as you can about the person in front of you. And unless the person has a very deep personal hatred for your person, which I doubt will be the case, or if that's the case, they will probably leave, you will find something that will make them tick. You will find something that will make them understand and appreciate the changes that you're doing. I mean, the last thing we expect in this world is someone doing something for us. If someone notices that you're doing something for them, there is no way that the person will not appreciate it. They will just, everything will backfire only if the methodology that you're using is not right for them. So listen to them first. That's my take on it. Rad, can you shed some light on number 2? You mean the second area, influencing your own emotional state? Well, as I said, our emotional life is most of the time passive. We suffer the consequences of our emotions. If you're feeling particularly angry or disappointed in someone or in something, you will see, if the disappointment is deep, that it will trigger specific reactions. Your perspective on your environment will be different. You will not be appreciative of something else. You will not be as energetic. You will not relate well to that person for the time being. And that may have, of course, it may be justified, and you might need some time to process that specific emotion. But if you don't want to be trapped in that, if you need to do something else, if you need to redirect your energy elsewhere, it's all about having the tools and the skills and the methodology to do exactly that. Does that make sense? I hope so. Right. So these were the 4 main areas of emotional intelligence. I've left you a couple of links. First of all, I encourage you to go to my website, take my self-assessment, and figure out what your starting point is. Again, don't feel like like any of this is personal. If you feel that your result is not something you like, It's not about making you feel good or making you feel bad. It's about giving you factual, point punctual information on where you are, where you need to develop, and what you can do. It's about taking the first step. And then, should you be interested in developing it, you can develop it at your own pace. That is the key of everything, and that is what I encourage you to go do right now. For everything else, feel free to get in touch. I'm reachable via YouTube. Any comment that you want to add on this webinar, feel free to do so later on. And any comment or question that you might have on this topic, feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, via my website, Facebook, by email, as you prefer. Thank you so much for spending all this time with me. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Edoardo Binda, Zane, and thank you very much for taking the time. I wish you a very great day, and hopefully talk soon.